We're going to talk here mostly just about how to contribute to open source projects. We're going to talk about LifterLMS a little bit, but really we're just going to talk about open source in general, how to get started. We're celebrating our first annual, hopefully it'll be annual, right? That's the wrong screen. Our first annual LifterLMS Contributor Month. We're going to be doing this in conjunction with Hacktoberfest, which is an event organized by GitHub, Twilio, and DigitalOcean. Saurabh, is this our 5th year? Is this their 5th year doing Hacktoberfest? Is that what you told me the other day?
Yes, it's the 5th edition.
The 5th edition. On the panel here, we've got Kathy. She does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff at CodeBox. She probably won't be talking, but if you have any questions in the chat, she'll be helping you out and chiming in and answering you there. We've got Saurabh. Saurabh is the newest member of the LifterLMS team. He's a developer and customer support representative. So if you've been in support in the last 3, 4, 5 months, you've undoubtedly seen Saurabh. If you pay attention on GitHub, you have definitely seen Saurabh because he's taking a lot of notes, raising a lot of issues, and really kicking my butt into gear to do a better job as an open source maintainer. And then myself, I'm Thomas Levy. I am the co-founder of LifterLMS, along with my, my partner, Chris Badgett, who is, I believe, in the attendees list here. We're going to make sure he doesn't interrupt and do any marketing stuff here because we're not talking about marketing. I do all the technical stuff with LifterLMS. I'm the lead developer. I've written probably 90% of the code in LifterLMS. So if you've encountered a bug, that's my fault. And I'm here to tell you how you can help me fix the bugs that I've created. But really, Hacktoberfest is an opportunity to get acquainted with open source projects. We'll post some resources about Hacktoberfest in later on in this webinar, but it's a big community-wide event put on by those 3 organizations I mentioned before, which its main goal is to get people to do their first contributions to open source projects across GitHub. So to participate, you can open pull requests in any open source project that has an issue labeled Hacktoberfest. They have some prizes. I think they're giving out t-shirts and stickers and stuff like that if you submit 5. We'll cover a little bit more how we're going to participate in that. We're going to have some lower cost of entry to get your first contribution to the LifterLMS project. But this is just going to be a brief overview of why you would want to contribute to open source projects, who it is who can contribute to open source projects, because it's not only developers, and a little bit about the process of contributing to an open source project. So we will get started with why you would contribute to an open source project. And there's a ton of reasons why you would want to do this. Those reasons include learning new skills and improving your existing skills. You get to meet people and interact with people who have similar or shared interests. You could possibly find a mentor, or if you've been interested in becoming a mentor, open source communities are a great way to meet new people who you can mentor. You can build and grow your reputation or career. Contributing to open source is a great way to get code or contributions or whatever you do on your resume. And you can affect change in the project you care about. As far as learning new skills and improving existing ones, when you contribute to an open source project, there's a lot of things that you might do on your own in your day-to-day job, your project, your hobby, that you might not necessarily do when you're working on an open source project. So you can gain exposure to those new software, those new platforms, libraries, languages. If you're interested in WordPress, which I'm sure you are if you're here, one great thing that's going on in WordPress right now is that they're integrating React into the Gutenberg project. So that's an example of a new library you could get involved in and learn through contributions to an open source project. You can also learn things like how to participate in code reviews, or reviews of any kind, really. As I'll mention later, this is not only about code. Although with any open source project based out of WordPress, code is a large portion of it. But when you're participating in open source, you're not working alone anymore. So there will be formal reviews of your code, of any of your contributions. So you'll learn how to participate in those things. And through the review process, you'll actually get a lot better at whatever it is that you are doing. Because there's now some real-time feedback around what you've done in your work. You can also become familiar with coding and documentation standards or style guides. Once you start to work in a large project, there's all sorts of stuff that you need to pay attention to in order to make the work you've done in the larger community possible. So one of those is coding standards, something that we're implementing in LifterLMS more and more diligently. Documentation standards, style guides, all that kind of stuff. Maybe less important when you're working on your own, although I'll argue that it is still important. But once you start working with other people, it becomes very, very important for quality's sake. You also get to meet and interact with all the people that have these similar interests. So all the maintainers and contributors, you already know that you have at least one interest in common because you're working on that shared project. Most open source communities are really warm and welcoming. If you follow around what goes on in the WordPress core, there's a really, really strict code of conduct that they adhere to. And it's all about diversity and inclusion. These communities, in general, are very welcoming. So LifterLMS strives to be so. You'll find that even if you've never contributed before, the maintainers of these open source projects really want you to contribute. So they're going to be really, really helpful to you with your first contribution or later contributions. You'll get to meet friends. If you ever go outside of the GitHub repositories, you go to meetups, networking events of any kind, conferences, that kind of things, you'll meet people that work on the projects that you work on, and you'll be able to create new friendships. I'm really, really, really huge on the WordPress community. And there's friends that I see 3 or 4 times a year at WordCamps. But I have really, really close relationships with them, even though I only see them a couple times a year. That's because we're kind of like involved in all the same things, and the things we care about with the WordPress core and the WordPress community are really important to us. So you kind of like break that barrier of entry, and you already know them. So it's really cool. And a lot of open source projects are maintained in some part by large companies. If you hang around WordPress long enough, you'll see that a lot of the hosting companies like Bluehost, DreamHost, WP Engine, so on and so forth, they have people on their staff who their job is essentially to contribute to core projects. So while you're working in these open source projects, you will get to meet people who may want to hire you someday. So by showing them your code, your documentation, your design, any of the things that you contribute to those projects, you get to meet people and kind of get your foot into those doors, which could lead to a career in the future. As far as mentorship is concerned, I mentioned that before. One thing that always kind of happens in open source projects is that you now have to explain why you've made the decisions you've made. You can't just commit code to a repository or write some documentation that doesn't make any sense or make sense only to you. So there's a back and forth, a discussion that's going to happen around all that kind of stuff. And through that, you might accidentally become mentored by somebody in a project. You're also always going to have to ask for help, especially when you're new to a project. There's so much stuff to learn about that project. There's so much information and history. And again, those maintainers might be willing to mentor you. And then as you kind of ascend and you become a core contributor or a maintainer or something like that, you can then pass that back on to new members of the community. And you're always learning and teaching. Whether you're experienced or inexperienced, you're going to be on one side of that wall or the other. And you're going to be helping others get acquainted with the project or contribute to the project, or you're going to be teaching people. So that's an important part of the open source community. As I mentioned before, you get to meet the employers, but you also, everything that happens in open source projects is by nature public. So if you have a GitHub account and you're a programmer, every pull request, every issue you raise in any open source project is going to be logged on a reviewable history. And that history of your GitHub profile can start to become your resume or a living document of all the work you've done across various projects. And that's going to be really cool, not only for your reputation as a member of the open source community, but it could also help you find a job or a career. And you can show people this is very publicly the work that I have done and how I've added value to projects. I believe that this is maybe a duplicate that I didn't remove from my slide, so we'll just skip that, although it's still true. Yep, these are definitely duplicates from a previous slide. So we're going to skip through the rest of the slide because I already mentioned that. My apologies. And we'll move on to how to affect change in a project you care about. We're hoping that if you're contributing to an open source project, you're contributing to a project you care about. Although as soon as you add a contest with prizes, there might just be an incentive to just win prizes. Saurabh has already found we've had 2 kind of spam contributions. Hacktoberfest started today. We've already had 2 spam pull requests to the LifterLMS repository where people are just trying to get very small contributions in order to win a t-shirt from GitHub, which is cool. But hopefully you care about the projects you're contributing to. And it's really empowering to have your voice heard in those projects. So if you want to see new features, if you have new ideas, anything like that, you can help kind of drive the direction of a project by participating in the project in a really active way. You can provide feedback on existing features or on the direction of higher level policies, on the vision of the project. And that's really cool. I mean, as soon as the first contribution I ever made to the WordPress core was literally 1 line of code. It wasn't even really a line of code. It was adding, for the programmers here, it was adding a variable to an action. So instead of passing 2 pieces of data to an action, it passed 3. And when I saw my name on that blog post, I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And I had no idea it was going to impact me in such a huge way. But I was like really, really excited about those 12 characters of the variable name that I sent to the WordPress core. So however small that change is, it's really empowering. It's kind of set me on a path to contribute more in larger ways. And I hopefully it will too. So the next thing you need to figure out is what to contribute. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings with open source projects is that open source is something that's entirely about code. And while it is a lot about code, it's not entirely about code. So of course you can write code. That's one way to contribute to an open source project community. But the community is another huge part of open source. So there's community events that can be organized. There's forums that can be moderated, so on and so forth. You can help organize the project. So that's kind of just maintaining things. As a project maintainer, I know there's always more tasks and things that need to be done than I have time for. And one of those is kind of keeping things organized. And I'll explain a little bit what that means later. Design is a huge thing. You can do user experience design. You can create style guides, that kind of stuff. And you can write documentation. And documentation is sometimes boring, but another great, but some people actually really enjoy it. So if you're into documentation, you can help write documentation. You can also create tutorials and examples, real world scenarios and use cases and things like that. The best way to write code is to tackle any open issues in an open source repository. So if you're on GitHub, you just kind of open the issue tracker. Every GitHub repo has an issue tracker. Find issues that aren't currently being tackled and tackle them. So that's literally just writing code. That's sometimes fixing bugs. It's sometimes creating entirely new features and new code. And then there's all sorts of tools and tests that are a part of an open source project. So if you're not familiar with testing, this is again another way to kind of get involved in softwares and libraries that you're not entirely familiar with. But that's a big part of any open source project. And if you look at some really massive WordPress projects, you could take a look at like WooCommerce or Easy Digital Downloads or LifterLMS, which is not as massive but is growing. We have tests, but about 20 to 40% of our code base is tested through automated testing. So that's a huge area where contributions are always welcome in open source projects. And I mentioned contributing to the community. And this is a huge one. This is really big and possibly the easiest way to enter into an open source community. You can just kind of find out where groups meet and ask questions in those forums and groups. We've just opened a Slack channel, a LifterLMS community Slack channel. We've had a really active Facebook group for 3-4 years now. And members of the community are always talking there and asking questions. So you can always ask and answer questions. You can request to help moderate. We've had members of our community ask if they can help moderate our Facebook group when they started to notice that there was a lot of spam happening. Again, as the maintainers of that community, Chris and Kathy maintain that community for us. There's only so much time in the day and spam is going to seep through. And as soon as we added a moderator, the quality of the group improved. And that goes for GitHub too, just moderating issues and looking and moving discussions ahead and things like that is really, really helpful. Live events are a huge part of the WordPress community and a lot of other open source communities as well, whether that be in the form of meetups or larger conferences and events like WordCamps. Those things take a lot of work and they're very, very valuable for the success of the community because it's a great way for people to get real-time help or easy entry into those projects and communities. And another way is to kind of spread the word, become an ambassador for the project and the community. And you can do that by presenting on the project at adjacent events and meetups. So, LifterLMS doesn't currently have any conferences. And as far as I know, there's no LifterLMS meetups, but there might be. But if you wanted to go and present on, learning management systems at a WordPress meetup, there's thousands of those, that could even be extended to like writing blog posts or hosting your own webinars or recording videos and tutorials and stuff like that. There's a lot of crossover in a lot of this stuff. So while writing tutorials might actually be a documentation task, it could also be a way to spread awareness of the community. I mentioned project organization. Some real easy examples of that would be in GitHub, there's always duplicate issues that get raised. There's labels that help organize issues, things like that. A project, like an organizer could go through and just leave some comments to help clean up duplicate tickets and issues and things like that. The same could go in any community forum like Facebook. Issues get old and they get stale. Any organizer could go through and just kind of review old tickets or old issues and see what's going on with them, if they're still valid, if we need more information or reproduction steps, or if as a result of some other change, that issue has accidentally gone away. Those can be cleaned up and closed. Issues also very often need like independent verification. So if one person says, I have this issue, especially in the world of WordPress, every WordPress website has thousands of plugins and variations of themes and things like that. The possibilities are endless when it comes to conflicts. And when an issue is reported, it could be a conflict with the theme and it might not be. And you can help validate those issues by reporting independent recreation steps on existing issues. And you can always help move issues forward by clarifying the issues and asking new questions and things along those lines. Design is a huge area. This is one area that I would love to have some contribution from in the LifterLMS community, because we know as a team that we do not have an actual designer on our team. So that we do the best we can and we take user feedback. And a lot of WordPress plugins, again, these are a lot of open source things, require design, and maybe design is an afterthought. So there's always an opportunity for the designers to get involved, and you can restructure layouts to improve usability, or to clarify features or clarify things that are maybe obvious to programmers like myself, but maybe not so obvious to the end user. User experience research is a really interesting area where somebody who's interested in that can sit down and work with real users to see what their issues with the product are, or what their successes with the product are or project are, and you can record those results and share the results of your research, and that could be a incredible help to any open source project. Style guides, as I mentioned before, are really important. LifterLMS doesn't have an official style guide, and I'm sure we're not alone in that. So creating and expanding style guides is a great way for designers to get involved in open source projects. I've read some interesting stuff in preparing for this about communities where designers came in and created artwork, created their own logos and stickers and things like that. I'm kind of really obsessed with cryptocurrencies the last year and a half or 2 years, and there's one cryptocurrency called Navcoin where they have just a member of their community who creates all these little, I guess they're like comics that like outline different features and reasons why Navcoin is a great cryptocurrency. So he created like his own little mascot for the community and things like that. And as an open source project, the maintainers just kind of adopted it and encouraged it. So there's always opportunities like that too. And as I said, there's a lot of crossover in these different areas, but work like that can help expand awareness of a project, and that could in turn bring new contributors in and improve the quality and success of the project. And of course, documentation. You can always create new documentation. I think that is an area in a lot of open source projects that is really lacking. You can go read some blog posts on the GitHub blog about like the most ignored areas of open source projects, and documentation is number one on those lists. You can take a look at existing documentation and help improve it. One of the problems we've had with LifterLMS is as we improve things in the product and the project, things change and then the documentation becomes outdated. We get support requests where people find YouTube videos from 2014 and LifterLMS looks completely different today. So those videos and documentation need to be improved and updated. And again, like I said before, creating tutorials or examples of project usage is a huge part. A lot of really successful open source projects have, like right within the code base, they have a folder with tutorials and examples. So if you're a new user, you can just download that and like run those tutorials straight away. So creating stuff like that, that's like maybe a more technical tutorial. But there's also just, you know, examples of features where you can set up a project with that, set up a website with that project and just record some examples of how to install it or how to use it or how to use maybe a niche feature that's not so well known and things like that. And those are all great ways to contribute documentation. So all that said, we're hoping that you're actually interested in contributing to an open source project. I would love for you to contribute to LifterLMS, but there's billions of projects out there. So choose one that's important to you and get started. And I'm just gonna go over real quick the technical details of making a contribution. I'm not gonna cover here, but we're just gonna talk a little bit about like what you'll wanna do to get started and how to choose a project. So you'll first want to familiarize yourself with the project and the community. You never want to just run in and just start trying to make change or exact change on a project. You want to kind of become a member of the community first and get a idea of the history of the project. I encourage you to join the community channels. It seems like every open source project, LifterLMS included, is jumping on Slack and getting their own private Slack channel. I'm wondering if we're going to reach like a critical mass of Slack channels because I've got too many. I can't keep up with them all right now. And I'm sure anybody on this call might have that same feeling. But there's Facebook groups, there's GitHub. Stack Overflow is a resource that any programmer is extremely familiar with, and we'll probably make jokes about how we don't really program. We just copy from Stack Overflow. I'm guilty sometimes. I like to copy and then actually retype the whole thing. That way it's not direct plagiarism. But you can get on Stack Overflow and look for questions about that project. Always review the project guidelines and policies. It's important to review the READMEs. If it's a GitHub project, most GitHub projects have a code of conduct. LifterLMS does not have one yet. It's something that I'm working on. The WordPress core has its own code of conduct. Review contributing guidelines. It's also important to you don't need to be a lawyer, but you're going to want to review the license of a project. You want to make sure it's actually an open source project. And of course, gather context around the project's recent history. I'll explain in a minute what that means and why that's important. But when you're familiarizing with the project, you want to get to know the authors, owners, maintainers, and contributors. Those terms maybe have various different definitions depending on the project, but generally the authors are like the initial contributors, the people who wrote the code or created the project. The owner might differ in that I think technically right now Automatic owns WordPress, so I'm not entirely positive about that. So the owner might differ from the actual author, and projects can also change hands. So there might be like an original project owner, and that project has been abandoned and adopted by another person or group or company or something like that. The maintainers, again, there might be some overlap here where the maintainer might be the author. In the case of LifterLMS, we authored, owned, and maintained LifterLMS, but maintainers can grow outside of that. If you look at the WordPress core, there's, I don't know, probably 50 or so developers that are kind of maintaining it and really active in the WordPress track and things like that. And then on some projects too, like the WordPress core releases, like the maintainers will rotate based on the release. So you'll see like right now, Matt Mullenweg, I believe, is like the core owner of the 5.0 release in WordPress, but that'll change for 5.1. And if you look back on the history of WordPress, it changes per release too. So they give like a different lead for that maintenance. And then contributors are anybody who's, participating in the community and contributing code or documentation or any of the things I mentioned before. It's important to make sure that the project is open source. Wouldn't really, I mean, if it's on GitHub, it is technically open source, but you want to make sure the project has a license. Again, you don't necessarily need to be a lawyer, although I do think it's important that if you're going to be contributing open source projects, you should familiarize with yourselves with the difference between various licenses that projects might use. At least if you're working in the WordPress space, at least understand what GPL is and what it means. Everything, the WordPress core, themes, plugins, etc., should be licensed under GPL, and if they're not, you're running into an issue. I'm not going to get into onto a soapbox about that, but familiarize yourself with that. Make sure the project is actively maintained and that it is accepting contributions. It is entirely possible that a project is just saying we're not looking for contributors at this moment, but the project can remain open source, as in the code is open and freely available, but they're not looking for the community to submit code or contributions to that. And you also want to see if there's any like open issues and pull requests. If the project is a ghost town, maybe you don't want to get involved in it. And one of the things Sarab and I have been doing in recent history is that I've been learning this as we go, is that even though the core contributors to LifterLMS are just 2 people, we still need to publicly track things in GitHub. And this is a way that we're helping to encourage people to contribute, because we don't want people to come to LifterLMS and just see that, oh, nothing's going on here. And you might want to contribute to a project where there's nobody. Maybe it's a really brand new project and you want to get in on the ground level. But in that scenario, you're going to want to make sure that the maintainers are going to pay attention to you. So that's something to look for. And again, if you get involved in that community and their discussion channels, you'll be able to see, even if there's not a lot of open issues, if the maintainers are going to listen to you. And you want to make sure the project is welcoming. It is. I skipped through that a little bit too far, but you want to make sure the project is welcoming. If like maintainers are abrasive in GitHub issues, maybe you don't want to participate in that. If people are rude on Slack channels or Facebook groups, maybe that's something that you don't want to get involved in. Maybe you're okay with that. I don't know. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a little bit abrasive in person. I don't want to do that publicly on GitHub, but maybe you're okay with that, and that fits with your vibe. I'm not going to bash it and say it's no good, but you want to make sure that you're going to fit in with the community and be welcome there with your personality and attitude. Like I said, the communication channels, it's really important to get involved there. And that's a really easy way just to ask questions. Like I said, you can find out where they congregate, where they discuss the project and their issues. I said GitHub is the obviously one. Slack is happening for a lot of projects and communities, Facebook, so on and so forth. There's Discord too. There's all sorts of different things depending on your community. I notice in like the cryptocurrency space, everybody's got Discord channels. I think maybe Discord is more open source than Slack is, so maybe that's why they're gravitating there. IRC is kind of going away, but that's another place where people communicate sometimes. And I'd encourage you to join those channels and introduce yourself. You can just hop in the channel and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, this is what I'm doing with the project. And I think that's a really great way to get your feet wet. And a lot of projects have open meetings where they invite the community to join in. The WordPress core does a really good job of this. If you follow anything on the fire hoses in the WordPress core Slack, you'll see that they go through all their bug scrubs and things like that on Slack, and it's all open. So you don't even necessarily need to say anything, but you can just kind of be a fly on the wall. We've started doing open office hours in our Slack. We do monthly bug scrubs on Zoom where you can come in and just help us scrub old tickets, keep the project organized and maintained. So check out what the community is doing. And then, as I noted before, it's important to review the project guidelines and policies. Always read the README, any policies, any documentation, the contributors' guides, that kind of stuff. And review the license. It's important too to kind of get some history around what's gone on in the project, especially if you're planning to contribute. You want to make sure you're not duplicating issues. So that's one of the reasons why this is really important. But I encourage you to review recent issues, review recent discussions, any pull requests, anything that's going on. And if you're in all of those channels where this kind of stuff is happening, there's going to be a lot of history, especially with a mature project. So you don't have to go back to step one, but you want to make sure you're abreast to what's going on recently. You can review pull requests too to see what new ideas, features, bug fixes have been implemented. And it's also a way to help you get to know who you want to be talking to, who are frequent contributors, who are the maintainers and community members that you want to be introducing yourself to. And then you can go ahead and make your first contribution. So again, like I said, there's making contributions is nuanced. This is really just an introduction to the general overview. So if you have any technical questions on how to actually do some of this stuff, we'll do a short Q&A afterwards. But then, as I noted, jump into Slack and just ask us questions. We're going to provide you with a bunch of resources and help you get your first contribution. But one thing to keep in mind is that you always want to communicate effectively. And as I said before, gather that context around the issue. You can open a new issue. You can contribute or discuss an existing issue. As I mentioned before, you can, verify recreation steps and say, yes, I was also able to recreate this issue, or you can just ask some questions around it. You can open a pull request, and that's kind of in coding terms, that's a way to fix an issue. Although if you're doing documentation, design, and that kind of stuff, that can come in the form of a text document or an image in the pull request. It doesn't necessarily have to be code. And then you always want to participate in the discussion around the contribution. I'll vent a little bit, but I get a lot of people who report issues on the WordPress.org forums. They say, this happened, this is what I expected to happen. And then I ask some questions and I never hear from them again. So if you are going to raise an issue or try to contribute, you need to stick around and participate and see that issue through to its completion. Effective communication is really important, especially since a lot of this stuff is not going to happen in real time. It's going to happen asynchronously in discussion forums and tickets and issues and things like that. It's really, really important to provide reproduction steps. A lot of GitHub issues will actually, when you open a new issue, the project will have like a template for how that project wants you to reproduce that issue. And even when the data seems superfluous and unnecessary, remember that you're working in a larger community, and while it might not seem important to you, it is important for the people who are going to try to fix your issue and help you out. So always provide as much information as possible. If you have a new idea, it's important to explain why that idea is important to the project as a whole and not just to your use case. And it might be a use case that's very important to you, but that does not necessarily mean it's a use case that's generally useful to everybody, or it might not necessarily be very obvious to everybody why that's a good idea. So always try to explain your ideas and explain it within the context of the project, not your use case personally. Always check documentation and issues for duplicates. So see if it's a known issue that there's a workaround recorded for. See if it's an issue that's already been raised and is in process, or maybe it's an issue that was raised and closed because of the lack of information. In those scenarios, if something's already been raised and closed but was never really fixed, it's always helpful to share that context so the maintainers can now look back to that themselves. Keep in mind that if you're raising issues with an open source project, the maintainers and the core contributors are seeing thousands possibly of issues. With LifterLMS, we're seeing hundreds, So your issue might be really, really clear to you, but it might not be stuck in the mind of whoever is working on the other side of that. So it's helpful to help them with the context you've already found. Keep things short and direct. It's not necessary to submit a 2,000 word essay on your issue. Most times that's actually prohibitive and makes solving the problem more complicated. So keep everything short and direct, to the point, on topic, focused. And this is a really important thing. There's a tendency, and I've experienced this myself, where I want to contact somebody privately because I feel that it might move the issue along more quickly, or I don't want to embarrass them if I found a bug or issue. But if there are public channels, it's really important to use those when possible. For all the reasons that I mentioned before, with building the public, the community, don't try to track down a core contributor or owner or maintainer personal email address and email them about your issues. You record it in GitHub. There's some exceptions to that, of course, with security issues. If you found a massive security issue, you don't always want to disclose that publicly right away. You want to give the maintainers of the project a chance to address that issue privately. But in general, it's best to use those public channels. And always remember to be patient. Again, there's a lot of things going on in open source projects. If you take WordPress as an example, there's thousands of bugs and open issues. And there's not that many people contributing. There's a lot of people contributing, but there's not thousands. So it takes time. So the issue might be really, really important to you, and it might be generally important to everybody in the community. But there's also a larger project scope, which it might not be as important to. So don't get frustrated and just stay the course. And with any contribution, there's always a possibility that the community might disagree with you. It's important to respect that and not get angry and stomp your feet and storm off, but to respect and understand and try to have some empathy for the greater values and goals of the project. Examples of new issues are reporting an error. Obviously, if you can't figure out how to solve it on your own, you'll want to report that. Proposing new features, and of course, asking questions. That's another thing that that's really important in open source projects, is just asking questions. And as a project owner, I find that sometimes just asking a question helps me understand an issue that I didn't even realize was an issue, just because somebody's trying to do something in a way that I didn't expect. And as a result of asking that question, it's helped me clarify some features or issues or user experiences or things like that. So that's a great way to contribute, is just to open an issue and ask a question. If you're looking at any existing issues, again, avoid duplicate efforts. Sorry, if you're contributing to an existing issue, you want to avoid duplicate efforts. Remember that there's a lot of people contributing to open source projects, so it's possible that something that you found that you want to fix as somebody's already working on. So it's always important to just kind of, again, get the context, read through the issue history, see what's going on there, and see if somebody's already kind of claimed it and is working on it. And by that means, like, if you're working on an issue, you'll want to let people know that you are. And it's not out of line to say, like, hey, would you like help with this issue? I'd like to work on it. And then the maintainers might come back and assign it to you, and then now that's your responsibility and your work, and you can get to it. You can always, as I said, with organizing projects, you can look through older issues and just ask questions about those issues to help figure out if those issues are still valid issues. And this is important too, if you've found an issue to an issue that's been reported, or found a solution to an issue that's been reported, you can, a great way to contribute is just to head into that issue and report your potential solution. And maybe that's going to help. Maybe it's a wonky, hacky workaround, or maybe not, but it's still helpful to let others know how you've solved similar problems. Opening a pull request is the process of actually contributing code or assets, whether it be documentation or whatnot, to an open source project. A great thing to do is kind of like look for the good first issue tags. You can snap them and pick them up and say, like, and then write the code to fix them, or write the documentation, or so on and so forth. Good first issue is a tag used across GitHub. Just generally, I think even when you create new repositories now, it's like one of the preloaded issue labels. I'll provide you with a link to like the LifterLMS open issues list later. That's a great way to start if you want to open a pull request. There's also like really simple things like fixing typos, broken links. We had somebody contribute a period at the end of a sentence that there should have been a period. Those things are helpful, although, obvious. They still matter. You can work on a contribution which was tasked or discussed in an existing open issue. And the other thing to note too is that pull requests don't necessarily need to be finished work. This gets kind of more into like the life cycle of a project as a whole. But if you're working on a very large issue, it could be a WIP or a WIP, a work in progress. And it's probably better practice to open pull requests early. Not that you want to contribute code or things that are broken, but it'll kind of help you let contributors know that you are actually working on this issue, and that you can see progress, and then open a discussion around your progress. And then finally, as I noted before, you want to participate in the discussion around the contribution. There is a possibility that you're not going to get a response right away. And again, don't resort to email and trying to contact contributors privately. You can always just kind of give a little bump on that issue after a week or two, and politely request an update. You also want to make sure you're watching for changes, questions, or clarifications that may be requested. Just because you've submitted a pull request or contributed something doesn't mean it's going to get accepted right away. And if you submit something and then disappear, your contribution is probably going to get closed and ignored, and you've wasted some time. So always check back, subscribe to those pull requests, get notifications about it, check in regularly, and see what the progress looks like, if they've asked for changes or questions or things. And just remember that your contribution can always be declined. It's possible that the code doesn't meet the right standards, or that it's an idea or feature that doesn't match with the overall vision of the project. And again, as I said, you want to be respectful. You don't want to go stomping your feet. And you can always, participate in discussion around that and ask for reasons why. Generally, a contribution isn't just going to be declined without reason. You'll be provided with a reason, but you can always follow up and ask questions around it too. And of course, celebrate. Contributing to open source is not easy. It is easy. It can be easy, but it's something that not everybody in the world does. And when you do it and you get a contribution accepted, you should celebrate. That's about it for everything. I just want to highlight real quick that this is the kickoff of LifterLMS Contributor Month. And I just want to go over what Hacktoberfest is really quickly. Hacktoberfest, like I said, is sponsored by DigitalOcean, GitHub, and Twilio. And if you want to participate in Hacktoberfest, you'll want to go to, I'll provide some links, but you can go to the Hacktoberfest main page and look for any issue tagged in any open source repository across GitHub that's tagged with Hacktoberfest. I think, Saurabh, we have about 40, I think. Does that sound right? Issues in GitHub in the LifterLMS repository that we've tagged as Hacktoberfest. So if you contribute 5 pull requests to any open source project, this Hacktoberfest contest will give you like I think it's a t-shirt, some stickers. But we're going to be kicking off this as Contributor Month in LifterLMS. We're going to have some lower prize points, and we're looking for it as a way to increase awareness that LifterLMS is an open source project, that we are looking for contributions, we are accepting contributions, and that maybe even more importantly, we're here to help you get your first contribution. We want to increase the number of contributors working in and around LifterLMS, because for us, it helps improve the product overall, which helps the success of all of our users and customers and things like that. So it's a great way to introduce yourself to the community. We're going to do prizes at 3 tiers. You'll get a prize for one pull request to LifterLMS, 3 pull requests, and 5 pull requests. If you hit that 5 pull request, you're also going to get some prizes from GitHub, so that's pretty cool. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I just said. So I'm going to throw up here some other resources. These are all mostly just links that are useful and interesting. Is that all of them? I want to skip to the next slide. There's one more. Oh man, I went too far. These are resources that I think will be useful. An introduction to open source, how to create a pull request. If you're not familiar with GitHub, there's a lot of steps that need to happen before you can even submit a pull request. We launched several months ago a contributor blog. It's make.lifterlms.com. That blog is going to be our main discussion area on the public internet for what's going on in LifterLMS. You'll see anything from announcements of events like this one, the LifterLMS Contributor Month and Hacktoberfest, to change logs. Every time a new update for anything in LifterLMS is published, we'll publish a change log there. And in the future, we're hoping that we'll have guest bloggers and core bloggers that will be blogging about things related to development and contributions and the making of LifterLMS outside of marketing new features and the other guest posts that we have on our general blog that's more of a blog for LifterLMS users. This is going to be the contributor blog and the people who create LifterLMS. We've got a blog post here at getlifter.com/Hacktoberfest that's all about our project, our contributor month. It's kind of the main page, the resources, it lists out the prizes you can get and that kind of stuff. And then this next one, the second to last resource here, is a link to all of the good first issues that we've marked. I think almost all of them are also tagged as Hacktoberfest issues. But once you get there, you can also filter by Hacktoberfest if you're interested in participating directly in Hacktoberfest. And then Saurabh found this resource. Somebody put together a giant list of resources that would be useful for anybody who wants to participate in Hacktoberfest. There's tons of links. Some of these are going to be duplicated there, but it's a great resource repository for anybody interested in contributing. Kathy, Kathy just posted all of these links too. If you just want to copy them, they're in the chat. And I think that's about all I have. Man, I timed that poorly, but we've got as much time as anybody wants. So we have a couple participants here. If anybody has any questions, there's like a Q&A button. You can raise your hand. You can come on as a panelist, or you can just type in a question. Saurabh and I are going to be here for a while until we're done answering any questions you might have about this or how to contribute or LifterLMS in general. So thank you so much. I don't know what I do now. I guess that's it. No questions? All right, well, check us out in Slack too. If you're not already on the Slack, I should have posted that too. It's lifterlms.com/Slack. The other thing I didn't highlight, but Saurabh and I are both doing office hours specifically for developers or contributors in the developers channel on our Slack channel. So that'll be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We've got 2 different time zones. I'm doing it kind of the middle of the day Pacific Standard Time, and Saurabh is doing them. Shoot, I don't know what time zone that is. It's like UTC 10.5 or something.
About 10:30 UTC.
10:30 UTC. So that'll be anybody that's not in the continental United States that might have some developer questions. Saurabh will be answering those there. And I encourage everybody to, contribute there, ask questions and get your first pull request in. So thank you very much.
I would like to add something.
Yes, please.
We have a bug scrub tomorrow.
Oh yeah. We started doing an open Zoom meeting where we kind of clean through and do some of that organizational stuff that I talked about in this presentation, where we're going through old issues and identifying and prioritizing them. So that's an open meeting. We do it once a month. It's the first Tuesday of every month at I guess is it 9 a.m. Pacific? Maybe it's 10 a.m. Pacific. If you head to the blog that I mentioned, you'll see there's a calendar there where you can see exactly what time that's happening. And also all our office hours will be on that calendar as well. It's a shared Google calendar that you can see your time zones. See what time these meetings are in your time zones. But anyway, that meeting is a great way if you want to pick up an issue. Come chat with Saurabh and I, and we would be happy to find something for you to work on based on your skill sets and interests and so on. Cool. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm trying to stop the recording. I guess that will be the official.